So welcome to everyone. My name is Anaïs Petitjean and I am the FARMD Community of Practice Analyst. Welcome to you all to our webinar on the role and use of subsidies in inclusive rural finance. So this webinar is co-organized and promoted by IFAD's Inclusive Rural Finance Network and also FARMD, which is hosted by the Platform for Agricultural Risk Management. So just before jumping into the subject, I wanted to go over the housekeeping rules. So first of all, this session will be recorded and also available on replay, and we'll share it on our website and also our social media. So during this webinar, you are more than welcome, of course, to ask questions using the chat box on the bottom of your screen, and also the speakers will direct them during the dedicated time. And also, eventually, at the end of the webinar, you will see an automatic survey that will appear on your screen for you to give us some feedback that is really useful. And also, now I will share the link to our FARMD Community of Practice, which is an interactive space for exchanges and also to receive peer-to-peer support on agricultural risk management, and also to share knowledge and best practices. So we highly encourage your subscription, and we look forward to exchange with you there. And now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Jonathan Agwe. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Anaïs. Good afternoon, all colleagues joining. Greetings to all of you from Ivory Coast and based in Abidjan. Could we have the first slide, please? Okay. Thank you again. And you're so generous, Anaïs, for taking the responsibility to be sharing the slides. For those who we are meeting for the first time, my name is Jonathan Agwe, and I am one of the IFAD's rural finance specialists. I am based in Abidjan and looking over the 24 countries of West and Central Africa. The topic that we've been asked to cover today is the role and use of subsidies in inclusive rural finance. And in fact, we are actually going to zoom in on IFAD's experiments with subsidies in inclusive rural finance. We're not looking at the broad topic of subsidies in inclusive rural finance. We are looking at what IFAD has been doing. And we want to thank the webinar series organizers, FARMD, PARM, and Inclusive Rural Finance Network for bringing us together this day. Next slide, please. We have about 1.5 hours together, and I tried to make sure that I provide to you what we'll be covering. We'll be looking at the objective of this particular session of the webinar series. I will try to set a context, and for those of you who remember what subsidies are all about, I will give you a quick retrospective on subsidies. And please pardon me if I repeat what you already know. It's just to make sure that all of us are on the same page. I will discuss a little bit of, IFAD and subsidies. How is IFAD doing subsidies, and if there is some kind of, power to produce the desired effect by the subsidies that IFAD is supporting. Then I'll quickly hand over to a panel of three, Mark, Lorna, and Sauli. These are my colleagues in IFAD, and they all hold the same responsibility position like me in different regions. Mark is covering NEN, Lorna, APR, and Sauli, ESA. They will introduce themselves in more detail when they take up the microphone to speak. We will be asking 3 challenging questions, one on direct financing, one on indirect but associated non-financing, and we have examples that we'll be discussing, and the last question on whether IFAD grants and matching grants are subsidies, and if so, what are the advantages and disadvantages of IFAD grants and matching grants as subsidies. So I want to make sure that we are on the same page. The Q&A session will be divided such that we After every intervention, after every question, which will be answered by the three panelists, we will give room for Q&A to the audience. So each question will take about 12 minutes total. Each of the three panelists will take 2 minutes each to provide some answers to the questions, and then we'll have 6 minutes for the Q&A for the audience. If we have some time, and depending upon how much interest you still have, we will just flip through 2 or 3 quick slides, which we call bonus slides on agricultural subsidies in the North versus the South. Please note that we are not discussing generic subsidies. We are focusing our discussion on subsidies to financial services. Thank you. Next slide, please. As I was indicating, our first point is the objective. In fact, we want to really look at the pros and cons of, subsidies and provide some guidance to people who are designing. And again, as I said, the subsidies we're looking at are subsidies to financial services. It's not generic subsidies. Do we need to use subsidies? If so, how? And how do we really avoid any of the distortions that we've been hearing that subsidies could cause? Are there incentives to provide subsidies? How do clients benefit from these subsidies? And so we want to make sure that at the end, we are seeing that if we have to do subsidies, there should be a win-win, intervention, both for the financial service providers who are, deploying the subsidies to the clients. Next slide, please. Okay, just so that we all understand what we're talking about, I try to come up again with what we already know, which is what is a subsidy. A subsidy is a government expenditure for individuals and households, and we all know what they are supposed to cover. This is to ensure that the individuals who benefit from them, kind of access essential goods while giving themselves the opportunity to stay afloat. The government provides subsidies so that people can recover from some kind of external shocks. Subsidies promote long-term economic stability. We all know that. Subsidies take different forms. This is just a quick overview of what we already know about a subsidy. Next slide, please. We talk about subsidies already as if they are quite important. But please note that as important as they are, many subsidies are perverse. And what do we mean by that? We mean that many subsidies actually have adverse unintended consequences. That slide is full of information about how perverse a subsidy could be, how perverse an incentive could be. But I want to highlight 2 detrimental, effects of perverse subsidies. One is the implication on the budget. National budgets have a dent because of subsidies that have come to stay. In the work that we've been doing, we see that many people have then created dependency on subsidies. Why? Because it seems to be cheap resources. You don't put in any effort to get them. So these are some of the, challenges, the cons about subsidies. There are many pros and there are a few cons, and these few cons are almost overriding the multiple pros. Next slide, please. Just because we need to understand that subsidy is not a homogeneous, intervention. We have to categorize subsidies. I'm sure many of you, if you can remember your economics lesson in the university, anybody who is interested in subsidies must have met this word somewhere. So I'm talking about our economics level 101 at university level. You must have understood that they are direct and indirect subsidies. They are production and consumption subsidies. They are broad and narrow monetary and non-monetary subsidies. The routine graph that you see to your right, of course, tells you what happens when the government provides a subsidy. When a government provides a subsidy, like dropping the price of a commodity, many potential clients will buy more of that commodity. But the supplier of that commodity would also have the tendency to want to drop the production of that commodity because their objective of profit maximization is almost tampered with. But we know that they kind of meet up with that objective when at a lower price, many clients buy larger quantities. So there is a trade-off. Supply is dropped or shifted to the right, as we always say it, but the decrease in price actually encourages more uptake of the commodity for which the price has been reduced. That's economics 101. Next slide, please. Now we run away from the generic, subsidies, and now we're talking about agricultural subsidies because that is the area that is of particular interest to us in IFAD. An agricultural subsidy, almost like subsidy we were discussing, is a government incentive paid to agribusinesses. So we're narrowing down to people who are working in the agricultural sector. Nothing new about this, but just to tell you the various characteristics of agricultural subsidies. Next slide, please. This is becoming more interesting. There are different types of agricultural subsidies, and you have the list of agricultural subsidies there. Input subsidies, agricultural hardware subsidies, energy, water, irrigation, import and export subsidies. But what you see there in red is what is of interest to us. Subsidies in inclusive rural finance. And when we're talking about inclusive rural finance, we're looking at different things together, some of which could be undertaken simultaneously, some of which could be undertaken sequentially. But I wanted to already indicate to you that in inclusive rural finance subsidies, we find in-cash and in-kind loan and credit interest rate caps. We find differentiated negotiated interest rates. And you are thinking about environments where there are inflations. And if there are hyperinflations, then you start thinking of how, subsidies can come in to help, the nominal rates for interest rates that we're calculating. We're thinking about, concessional interest rates. Are these subsidized? Are they subsidies? We're thinking of blending for affordability. We're thinking of matching grants. And talking about matching grants, when do you really consider them as, subsidies? Is it when you apply them ex ante, that's before the activity, or ex post, after the activity, and you then introduce a matching grant as a bonus? We see interest rate buybacks. These are incentive schemes, again, that appear to have the characteristics of a subsidy. And I take you back to the graph that we looked at earlier on, and you will realize that anything that we're talking about subsidies should have that effect of, providing some value, for the beneficiaries. when we provide financial education, expenses on financial education, are those subsidies, or can these guys to whom we are providing financial education actually go pay for it themselves and get that education? If not, what we provide to give them financial education that leads to financial literacy, is that a subsidy? Of course, technical assistance, when we provide technical assistance, when we provide capacity development, to people working in the inclusive rural finance environment, are these subsidies? So we're putting question marks around here and provoking you to do some thinking. And our three panelists will be coming up, to kind of galvanize the thinking and tell you how IFAD is really, doing around the subsidy topic. Next slide, please. IFAD and agricultural subsidies. We know today that, people defend why subsidies should be given to farmers. There's a lot of literature out there. But what we notice is that the majority of subsidies are actually given, to people related to their outputs and inputs. And very often the literature is showing that a lot of the subsidies actually go to larger producers, over the small scale farmers. And you all know that IFAD's mandated target is small scale farmers. So the big question that we are looking at, which we'll be trying to answer, is it's not whether IFAD should support subsidies, but how. So we are already agreeing that IFAD needs to support small scale farmers and other people in the rural market space. So we are agreeing that IFAD should do it, but how, where, and when is actually what we'll be trying to look at. Next slide, please. I used a word, efficaciousness, and I defined it from the beginning, is to find out if, the impact of a subsidy is actually what we want, to see. If you provide a subsidy somewhere, is the outcome of that subsidy the desired effect that you wanted to see from the beginning? This question for us is extremely important and a difficult one to answer. The chart that you see before you is saying that IFAD, starting from your left to the right, the chart that you see on the screen is showing you that IFAD is very much involved in capacity assessment, capacity building, and capacity development issues. Look at that column in green. The column in yellow is also telling you that IFAD does lots of things with financial service providers. IFAD does lots of things on approaches, delivery channels, processes, funding mechanisms. The right extreme end column that is in blue tells you that IFAD is very much involved in traditional and innovative financial products. IFAD is also involved in traditional and innovative risk management products. IFAD is even venturing into bonds, right? We are presenting this array of activities to tell you that IFAD is at the forefront of inclusive rural financial services. Starting from left to right, we are trying to identify a sequence. It is difficult because there are activities that need to be done before others follow, but sometimes we don't follow that protocol. There are activities that are done simultaneously. Some a little bit, kinked, meaning you start one, you don't finish, you start another one. So here we have a picture of the sort of things that IFAD is doing in inclusive rural financial services. That is what you're seeing there, the picture. We are suggesting that if things were under control, we would want to start first from the left and then going all the way to the right. But life is not that, easy. Next slide, please. Still talking about whether the desired effect of, a subsidy would be realized. You know that the rural market space where IFAD is operating is heterogeneous. What do I mean? Start again from your left to the right. The orange pyramid tells you the types of, farmers that you find in the rural market space. From the bottom of the pyramid going up, the orange pyramid, you start from subsistence family farmers all the way to the tip of the orange pyramid. You see, farming entrepreneurs, those who are doing farming for a business. The pyramid shows you the proportion of the different types of, farmers that we find in the rural market space. Next, in the middle, the green inverted pyramid shows you the volume of, value chain produce. What that pyramid says is the agro industries produce the largest volume of value chain produce, and the inverted tip of the pyramid tells you that the subsistence farmers are actually producing the lesser of the value chain produce. Now, to the middle of the extreme right is the list of financial products. You start from financial graduation products, which are like grants, conditional cash transfers, to subsistence farmers. And you go through asset transfers, you go through programs like value chain development, then you go to microfinance, then you go to SME development, and then you go to commercial finance. Because the rural market space is heterogeneous, we don't see any one size that fits all. Extreme right of the picture you're seeing there, it shows you that inclusive rural finance, is a spectrum of both financial and associated non-financial services that go across the spectrum of different categories of people in the rural market space. Again, I'm just repeating this to make sure we all understand it. They are, grants and conditional cash transfers, which are actually, financial services provided to extreme poor people. Are these subsidies? We don't know. Right at the top, what you see there in red, we find market price loans to agro-industrial and international trade, farmers that are producing for international transactions. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to end on this slide, and then I jump quickly to our panel. I brought this slide up to show you that IFAD is involved in blending. I'm not going to spend time to define what blending is, but just look at that table. You will discover that it is a multiple sources of loanable resources with different conditions put together, and some number crunchers come up with a composite interest rate, which they call average weighted annualized cost of funds. This is what blended resources are presented to a financial service provider. For example, Apex in Ghana. Apex takes this average weighted cost of funds. Remember, I'm not talking about cost of capital dictated by central banks. I'm talking about concessional financing. So the financial institution takes, a weighted annualized cost of funds, adds its own cost of funds, gets an average, thinks about, guarantee mechanisms, and say, you know what, I want my resources to be covered. And the way they feel comfortable is you need to pay for that coverage through us. The next thing is I want my retail financial service providers to also make a margin. And I want that margin to be delivered through me so that I distribute it to my network of financial service providers. When you look at all of those cost elements, starting from, that's the bottom part of the table, starting from left to right, we end up with, a blended interest rate of 9.5% for, blended financing, which is an interest rate very low compared to market rates in Ghana, 26%, 30%, 35%. When IFAD is involved in doing this, looking at all of those elements highlighted in yellow, the question is IFAD involved in subsidies? The answer will be yes. Is this the right way to do it? We give that question to our experts, and I'm going to hand over to our experts now to get into some of the questions and answers. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, but take me back to the first slide, second slide, please, because that's where we will focus. That one. Okay. I'm going to go through, these questions and ask each panelist to take 2 minutes each. And the first question is on direct financing. And I start with Mark. Mark, we are friends. Does IFAD subsidize interest rates on loanable resources?
Oh, I thought I was doing the guarantee one.
Okay.
Let me pick that one, Jonathan.
You take that one, Sauli, please. Take that one.
Perfect. Thank you. So on this question, firstly, thanks so much, Jonathan, for very comprehensive presentation. It's very exciting also to put a bit of provocation in there. The perversion of the work that we do in the development world, I think it's very interesting.
Remember that you have 2 minutes, please, and then
yes, indeed. So IFAD business model is actually, we are in the business of concessional financing. So obviously, IFAD does subsidization of loanable resources. Our business model is to offer loans to governments and loans to recently also to private entities with concessional elements to enable investment into projects that have development outcomes. So yes, we do subsidize loan costs. When we do within the projects, when it includes budget for on lending, so on lending to small clients, farmers in the countryside, this time we call them credit lines most of the times. And the credit lines also have concessional elements. So many times the concessional element include low interest rate from IFAD or from the project to the financial institution who is intermediating. Also, risk-sharing elements are included often in the credit lines, some sort of a first loss mechanism or other. And we also often include a technical assistance facility to this credit line, so to enable a lower end cost of the pricing. But it's not only the costs. Why do we offer this? Actually, the second part of the question, Jonathan, is why. So first is how. So what I explained, then second part, why. So the intended outcomes normally are, we want to have certain types of loans provided, sometimes green loans, sometimes smallholder loans, sometimes sustainable loans, adaptation loans, mitigation loans, different type of loans that we want to enable or facilitate. So that's one expected outcome. Another one would be that the intended types of end beneficiaries or end clients are reached. So we need to have a specific target group that would have otherwise not have had the access to this type of lending. So that would be a second outcome of the subsidy. And then the third one is that appropriate pricing is offered. So, okay, we may or may not have below market rate lending to the end clients if the first and the second intended outcome are strong or required by the intervention or by the support of IFAD to this project. So the three intended outcomes: types of loans, types of end clients, pricing, appropriate pricing at the low end of the market rate or below market rate, depending on the case, would be my answer, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sauli. Mark, you want to come second on the same question?
Sure, I'm going to be real quick. I agree mostly with everything that Sauli says. My big issue with any kind of subsidy, particularly in pricing of a loan, is that it doesn't always get us the development outcome that we're looking for. I mean, we're always far more optimistic about use of funds than I think we should be. One of the issues that we have is in our design, the inclusive rural finance policy, which was articulated in 2021, requires that we are demand driven, or we meet the needs of the beneficiaries. And we often don't know what those are. And so what happens is you can price a loan at whatever price you want, and they're not going to take it if they don't need it or don't want it. The classic challenge that we're having now, and I say classic because it's an emerging one that will be classic, is that we want smallholder farmers to adapt to climate change. And that requires significant asset investments on farms. And how can we incentivize them to make a large investment? And can we just subsidize price? And I don't think that it's just a matter of price. There's a package that we have to look at. So when you think about subsidies, you have to think about the package of ancillary, or the whole package of the elements that we can use to support a change in behavior or access to capital, or whatever our needs are. So pricing is really a blunt instrument, basically, and it doesn't always work in our lines of credit, and we've seen that. And I would just say, finally, one of the things that we are also always trying to establish, which doesn't always work with our lines of credit, is long-term path to sustainable financial services. And the problem is that just if you subsidize prices for a little while, people will take advantage of those prices. But later, when they go, okay, well, those prices aren't there anymore, I'm not gonna bother borrowing, and then they lose the relationship with the financial institution. So it has to be a market-based, as close to market-based relationship as possible. And simply reducing prices is not necessarily the way to do that. So I'll turn this over to Lorna. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I generally agree with you guys, pricing, demand, all these other things. I think some of our subsidy, though, I just want to bring our attention to the fact, also in an APR, it's a little bit of a different context. We don't actually often have subsidized lines of credit to the banks. We often have what we call PARM. So where we see the subsidy, or what I've been told, and I think that's true, is that we see a lot of times the subsidy in terms of the length of the term of the loan. So the way the loan is not, it's not just about price to the line of credit, it's also about the terms and conditions, and there's a grace period, and then there's a length of the loan. And so that often it is a form of subsidy, because then the financial institutions that might get that will be able to offer loans that they can't normally offer because of their funding structure. So in that sense, it has a little bit of that subsidy. And whether they pass it on or not, I think depends on, on the market itself. But I also want to add that in general, I find that, again, this one size fits all issue. Is sometimes it's very good to have some lower pricing on the loans compared to the market. But just keep in mind, and I'm speaking now for Asia Pacific area, is that there are a lot of cash flows from farms, for example, or from SMEs that can support a higher rate. And so that's something that's important to look at. You shouldn't just keep the lines of credit below market just because, you know, you're forced to do it. You have to kind of look also at who's using it and what's affordable. So, and that way, whatever the subsidy is gets extended to more people, essentially, that really need it. That's it from me.
You're on mute, Jonathan.
Thank you, Mike. I was thanking the three of you discussants, and now the time is up for Q&A from our audience. Dear audience, you have 6 minutes to go for this particular question. Ask your questions, provide your contribution, say anything that you really want us to hear. Anais, I think you can be looking at those who are showing up their hand and we call them to intervene. The first 6 will be good. Each one takes, 1 minute to ask the question, and then we provide answers after this 6.
Okay, so I will allow Yusuf, who raised his hand, to talk. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you, Yusuf.
Okay. Number one, when you are using the Ghanaian example, that assumes that those items of funds, those particular funds are the only funds belonging to the bank. But I know that in banking, a bank also has monies that they get from deposits from the public, which is all part of the total funds available to the bank. So when you are looking at this, your subsidized rate, are you saying that the funds from the public will be separated from the pool of funds in which IFAD funds has been included for calculating the weighted average cost of funds? That is number one. Then number two, I think it was Michael who mentioned something about how low or how realistic should the subsidized rate be. For example, in Nigeria, most farmers always say they want to borrow at single-digit interest rate, which means any rate that is less than 10% per annum. So what is the closest, how do we arrive at a rate that is fair in terms of subsidy? Over.
Second audience question.
I can take one question that I saw written by Christian, I guess. He asked, is there any guidance that compiles the cons and how would we manage them when designing a scheme?
Okay, that is the second person posing question. Can we go to the third? If not, we can already start answering because we want to manage time.
There's a comment, Jonathan, that says, I think subsidies should go to improving the credit worthiness of client financial literacy so that financial service providers would finance agri-enterprises. That's from Gaetan.
Okay.
So why don't we address some of those? Anybody want to address the question?
Yes, let me start with the Ghana one because that was the last table that I presented. Yusuf, I think you're the one who asked that question. If we will share this presentation, if you look at that table, you will notice that we are combining loanable resources from 5 sources, one of which is Apex Bank. And Apex Bank is certainly, assembling resources from different sources. Maybe savings, maybe their own capital, maybe some philanthropies that have deposited, monies with them. But what Apex Bank did was they said, we will introduce our monies into this blending mechanism and they quoted the interest rate. It's right there. I think it's 12%. So that is what they came up with and say, okay, we want to join this blended financing facility, but we are not going to give our money at, below market price, But given the fact that you are taking this money to combine it with resources from GCF, price at zero, we will be happy to take this money's price at zero, put it together with our own money that we would have given out at 26%, put it together. IFAD also provides its own monies at 0%, but if you guys give us all these monies over at least a 24-year period, we will be happy with the formula that you've used to come up with a single-digit interest rate, 9.5. That is what was happening. Yes, the bank actually imposed its own market rate, but given the fact that it now blended with other resources over a long economic horizon, they then saw the advantage of blending. The question on guidance note, in fact, the person who's asked that question, this is why we're heading to, we're doing this discussion to get up to something that will come up, like a guidance note for our project designers. That's what I wanted to contribute. Mark, please take over the other questions. The realistic single-digit interest rate, Mark.
I don't see the question. Solly or Lorna, did you want to grab it? I didn't see the question.
I mean, every place I go to, farmers want low interest rates. I mean, that's not really, I mean, of course, that's what the demand is. But again, it's an issue about whether or not whatever they're doing supports or they can support that interest rate. And so some activities cannot support more than a single digit, and it also depends on the inflationary environment and all these other things. So it's very contextual. And that's hard to, that's actually a bit of the financial literacy side of the whole thing, is in my opinion, is to, discuss how that, whether or not with the farmers or in this case, production or the SMEs, about whether or not their business can support the interest rate that's being offered. And I'll add to Jonathan said, he put in a cost model, which is just, cost plus. And there's also a lot of financial sectors that offer a market price model, right? So whatever the market will bear. And so I think that it's really very contextual, and I think we'll get more into this as we go on, because everything is context is not a one. Again, every country is very different in terms of their financial sector and making that kind of inroad into the financial sector. And for me, I think a lot of it is also access. It's not just about price, it's about access and how we use it. Thanks, over.
Sauli?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lorna. Given the contextuality of the economies, it's difficult to make a promise that it will be this or that interest rate that IFAD is able to facilitate. There are hedging costs to financial institutions or to our partners, which sometimes exceed the benchmark of 10% that you put out. Meaning that if the inflation or the fluctuation of currencies cause the economies to have a natural interest rate of beyond 10% in the lending, then it will be difficult for financial institutions to go below that. Otherwise, it's not sustainable in terms of financial sustainability of these private sector operations. So that type of a benchmark is difficult to say for a global let's say a global expectation. However, what we should do, and what we've done in a recent project in Eastern Africa space, is that we do an interest rate survey in target markets periodically. If a project is financed, and that project that I'm talking about finances over a duration of close to about 10 years. And within that period, we do 3 times interest rate survey to understand what is the going interest rate in each of the target markets. And then what IFAD does, we supervise each of the end loans through a reporting mechanism to understand and to make sure and ensure that the bank who are offering loans with the resources provided by IFAD do not exceed the lower end of the going market rate currently in the market. So thereby we ensure that our offer is affordable. It supports accessibility and specific kind of lending products, like I mentioned before, the 3 types of outcomes: what is the product, who are the end clients, and what is the price, so that we ensure that the right type of products are going out, the right type of people are reached, and the pricing is affordable and appropriate for the age of the context. So that is basically the approach that we took in a project recently. And we do that by we enforce it by supervisions and quarterly reports received from the financial institutions that implement, so that we are able to to understand what is the cost to the end client, and then have an intervention if it becomes expensive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sauli. And let me just compliment, by saying that context matters, and the language that we are increasingly using in IFAD is negotiated interest rates, because in the rural market space where we are working, there is no financial, market for demand and supply, where we can allow, this demand and supply forces to determine an interest rate. So we need to negotiate. We need to negotiate with all stakeholders, and the resultant interest rate that is negotiated is a win-win interest rate for all stakeholders. The financial service provider must find their interest in it, meaning their sustainability is guaranteed, and returns on investment for the beneficiaries also. So IFAD is increasingly encouraging multi-party stakeholder consultation platforms in which interest rates are discussed. Mark and my colleagues will agree with me that the new IFAD rural finance policy allows for interest rate discussions, like Sauli just said. It's no longer a bank's secret. No, interest rates are discussed so that everybody who needs this money or who is using this money finds their own weighted margin in it. Thank you. We're going to switch to the next question, and question number 2 will be asked and taken in this order. Mark, you will come first, followed by Lorna, and then last but not the least, Sauli. And the second question is around the indirect but associated non-financing tools. How does IFAD subsidize risk management tools? The question is to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think what we're talking about here are very similar issues as in the last question, talking about cost and risk, focusing more on risk. Obviously, how do we take risk out of the equation using both monetary and non-monetary support mechanisms or tools or instruments? And I have a few examples I'll give, but generally, what we try to do, some of the examples for monetary or guarantee mechanisms, premiums that are being paid on risk instruments like insurance, and even matching grants, which is a way to bring down the cost of an investment to the borrower. So on the monetary, non-monetary side, there's a whole pile of things that we do, and we do quite well, that can come into a package of risk management activities. Technical assistance is one of them. Improved market access through guaranteed contracts is another one. And both of these, all of these combine to improve access or decrease the cost, or even just provide access. A few examples that I've got is credit guarantee insurance premiums get paid. Sometimes that allows somebody with no collateral, formal collateral, to take a loan. These are particularly effective for women and youth, and we've seen them being used in a project in Moldova. Another example in many, many countries is you organize technical assistance and long-term contracts with large buyers. And then that contract can act as a type of collateral for people who don't have them. So it's a very simple and fairly efficient way of getting a bit of guarantee, a risk reduction for the borrower. We have one famous example is organizing village savings and loan groups and providing solidarity guarantees or capital. And some countries, those are widespread and well used. In other countries, they're relatively new. And so we still excel at that at community-based financial institutions. So it's another way of providing collateral for borrowing and lending. Another one is national guarantee mechanisms or instruments. So that would be a guarantee fund that's established at a regional or national level, and they would take, depending on the size of loans, they would either guarantee individual loans at commercial banks or financial institutions, or they would do a portfolio. So they would guarantee a portfolio, a bunch of loans at once. A couple of things that got mentioned was hedging mechanisms. This is for non-sovereign as well as sovereign lending, but it works very well for agri-enterprise. So you provide or you pay for some kind of hedging mechanism that may or may not be affordable given the size of the loan. Another interesting example that we put into a design, and we've seen it work in other contexts, is writing a contract. Using a revolving fund that's being set up by the program with a line of credit to take a first loss position on a contract on a loan from a commercial bank to microfinance institution. So the wholesaling, the revolving fund takes a first loss position and takes a lower charges a lower rate. So you got a blended finance rate and a first loss position, and that leverages in the commercial bank, and they'll come in and they'll do the whole loan to a microfinance institution, which provides liquidity to institutions that are closer to the ground, and they can get the loans out to the shareholders. So these are just a bunch of examples, but I wanted to also just say what we try to do in every case is how do we develop long-term access to financial services. I've said this, it's like a recording, but we have to have a demonstrable path so that our beneficiaries have, some kind of access to long-term access to financial services. And that's usually through some kind of development of a relationship. And we can see that just the relationship with a financial institution is a form of guarantee because they get to know the client better over a longer period of time. And I would just end by saying, that even in lines of credit that we just talked about, providing grace periods and providing technical assistance to the wholesaler that's lending to other partner financial institutions is actually a good form of guarantee and risk reduction as well. And I'll leave it at that. And I know that my colleagues will have lots and lots to say. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Mark. We now go to Lorna.
Yeah, I won't take too long. So I'm going to just mention a couple things, buildings, so we can track this back even to the first question. If we're looking at the target of our smallholders, for example, they face risks on so many different things, and it's a risk of, I don't want to go through it, but there's a huge cycle of different kinds of risks that they face. And all of these instruments, I think that Mark mentioned, for the most part, addresses in the risk that a financial institution has to think of, and they have to assess all these risks that the producers face, and they put a risk premium in. And this is, again, the cost-based model, right? So they put a risk premium in for every borrower. And the risk premium is full of all these different risks. And so every time you have one of these instruments that come in, whether it's the first loss, whether it's index-based weather insurance, whether it's all these other things, it can allow the bank or the financial FI or whatever to reduce that risk premium and lower the cost in their internal costing. And that's all I'm going to say. Move on to Solly. Thanks, Solly.
Thank you, Sauli.
Okay. So on this one, just maybe I can just to bring something new to the table. Maybe an experience from Kenya. So I'm based in Nairobi, and in Kenya, what we did is that we did an assessment of the financial sector before designing the raw finance program. And we came to the conclusion that the commercial banks, the large commercial banks actually have a lot, but they have very limited risk appetite to finance the smallholders. So they don't want to go that way because they know the high risk involved. And then we found that the SACCOs and the savings and credit cooperatives and the microfinance institutions and microfinance banks have limited liquidity, but a lot high appetite to enter into the raw financing market. So what we did, we offered credit line to the ones that have no or limited liquidity, and then we offered a credit guarantee facility to the ones that have a high liquidity position but limited risk appetite. So in a way, it's important to find the right instrument for the right partner and for the right financial institution we want to mobilize to invest into the market. So maybe that's something interesting. Of course, then the risk is if we provide credit guarantee to a financial institution like a commercial bank that never does farmer financing. How can we rest assured that they continue to do anything like that after the project is over and a guarantee is out? So there need to be a strategy that they develop then the products and to have the TA at place to actually have a sustainable pipeline of investment and all of this. So that's in a way a strategy that we took in Kenya in one raw financing project. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sauli. And interestingly, you highlighted a point that we need to emphasize on, which is IFAD providing, loanable resources on one side, and then, risk management resources on the other side. But we want to make sure that our audience understands that these two types of instruments, tools, are not, domiciled with one and the same financial service provider. Otherwise, they will cause a conflict of interest. So we always separate, the loanable resources from the risk management resources, just to make sure, they are not together. Otherwise, of course, there is an innovative approach, the refinancing facility, where maybe cash collaterals can actually be used for on-lending. We're going to give this space to the audience. Again, please ask questions on or around this second question or make comments because we know that many of you are experts. You can also chip in what your experience is before we go to the third question. So the floor is open now for questions from the audience.
Jonathan, there was some questions that were not that appeared before, but maybe we can still tackle them now. So Shabu said, can you clarify the relationship between GIRSAL and Apex activities in Ghana regarding subsidies?
Clarify the difference between Apex
and GIRSAL?
Yes, okay. Right. GIRSAL, thank you, whoever asked the question. GIRSAL is actually a risk management joint, and it is actually looking after several risk management activities, including insurance, right, and credit guarantees and mutualities, whereas the Apex Bank particularly is responsible for loanable resources. And if they are doing any type of credit insurance, which is what they shouldn't be doing, it has been discouraged. The only responsibility that is left with the Apex Bank is to do what the Central Bank of Ghana has asked them to do, which is substituting for the Central Bank, looking after, controlling, monitoring the 76 rural and community banks in Ghana. That is the responsibility of the Apex Bank. So the Apex Bank, in a way, is acting like a wholesale it assembles these loanable resources from different sources in a cost-effective way, puts them together, blends them, on-lends to beneficiaries through its retail network, the rural and community banks. So I'm trying to say that GIRSAL is a guarantee mechanism. It is almost venturing into equity, but the Apex Bank is doing part of the responsibilities that the Central Bank of Ghana would have been doing, and it is also acting as a domiciliation for wholesale and retailing these wholesale resources through its network of RCBs. I hope I make that clear difference between GIRSAL and the Apex Bank.
Thank you, Jonathan. There was also a contribution from the live streaming on Foundry Community of Practice. Someone said that under the private sector financing program, IFAD does not subsidize loan interest rate, but try to offer interest rate lower than the market.
May I ask Mark to comment on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to understand is that is something that I think Lorna said, and is that the banks will look at the myriad risk elements that they see, and they will price according to that, right? And anytime you can reduce one of their risks and or increase one of their increase their profit margin on lending, they're going to adjust their rates accordingly. You hope. So, for example, if you give them a grace period on lending, that's akin to a blended rate, because they're not going to have to pay for a while. Or if you give them if you give them 3 to 5 years, that's a substantial subsidy, and you should expect lower interest rates. I mean, and what Solly was saying earlier about, you have to sit down and negotiate with these guys. That's what Jonathan said as well, a negotiated rate. And one of the things that's been coming out of the implementation of the new inclusive rural finance policy is that we have to be more proactive about how we get involved and how we ensure that the development outcomes are being met with our lines of credit, particularly. So use of funds, targeting, and pricing, so that we can ultimately get as low a price as reasonably possible for the real risk, because sometimes the financial institutions don't actually have a good idea of what the risks are. You see, Solly was mentioning about the SACCOs. They're on the ground. They have had clients on the consumer side in rural areas for a long, long time, and they're essentially lending themselves anyways. And so they have a different perception of risk. They also have different transaction costs. So their whole business model is set up to have a lower interest rate. So we should expect that of them. And so we have different means of reducing the price. I just wanted to quickly just address one question that came up. I think it was David Serge asked, something about distorting markets. There's two things I think about distorting markets. One is our loans are so small, we're not going to distort markets. That's a bit, I don't know, I wouldn't say arrogant, but naive. Maybe both are not very nice, but we're not going to distort markets, right? And I'm happy to distort a market if it gets me my development outcomes, which are two: the change of behavior, or the outcome that we want, higher client resilience, for example, and to some demonstrable, plausible pathway to sustainable financial services. And I don't actually even care if it's a loan. If you have access to savings or insurance, or cheaper funds transfer costs, all those things should be considered as part of what people need and want. And I see, so ultimately it's being able to justify whatever we do based on those two considerations. Over.
Thank you very much. Sauli, your private sector perspective on,
Distortion.
Yes.
Yeah, please. So indeed, like Mark was saying, sure, because like I said previously, we are in the business of offering concessional lending for development outcomes. So obviously, there's always some level of distortion. We can't really escape that. I mean, that's what happens. But then when we do these private sector investments, which we have been trying to do in the Eastern Africa space, and also through credit lines, then offering lending to financial institutions. So my view, obviously, these are getting technical, these questions, so which we have, we can have a debate on these. But what my view is that, and what we took the view on our private sector operations in Eastern Africa, lending, and also the sovereign credit line lending in Eastern Africa, is that we should not put any one financial institution in a position to take a monopoly or advantageous market position over the other ones who are not offered the same resources. Now, how do we then ensure that? We must make sure that whatever technical materials we offer, we make it public. So if we provide, for example, technical assistance or technical tools and guidelines for, let's say, green finance, we offer that across the market to all financial institutions so that they're all able to pick up the same. Then when we offer technical assistance, we try to offer it across the market. When we offer a concessional lending for financial institutions for them to on-lend to the end market, we try to ensure that that works as a kind of an example or a model for other financial institutions that can pick up the same. And we can then try to offer similar conditions to other financial institutions going forward, or help them to access similar resources from other DFIs and IFIs. We are just a small player. IFAD is offering small 10 million, 5 million, 2 million, whatever amounts to financial institutions, whereas some of our DFI big brothers offer 100 million, 300 million. So, we are not alone there. So we are not distorting the market normally to an extent that we in a way cause any trouble in the competitiveness. But anyways, we have to take those questions into consideration when we are doing our interventions. So we have to try to keep it in mind, and then make sure that we don't, put any one financial institution too much ahead of the other one, so that they would push others out of the space. Something like that, I guess, Serge, to your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sally. Lorna, please try your hand on this distortion thing.
I tend to agree. We don't have a big impact on the markets, for the financial markets. Personally, from my perspective of being an ex-banker, an investment banker, and also a lot of time in the microfinance institutions, any of these things I think are pretty temporary glitches, if any. So and a lot of times it's the risk that actually, that they're absorbing in that sense. So, if it's a temporary thing, which maybe establishes a relationship that can move into something else, that would be better priced and more equitable on both sides, I think that that's not a bad thing, an initial subsidy. What I do not like, and somebody mentioned here about working capital, I think it's very dangerous to offer really below market rates for working capital, in the sense that businesses should be, regardless, ag businesses or production or whatever, should be based on something that's viable. So I always look at the viability first, and then the affordability and how to finance it. So I think that that's important. So I prefer to see lower or subsidized interest rates that on just sort of more fixed asset investments, and because there is often some risk. And I will also mention in this, because we may not get to the next round, that with sometimes what we are asking people to invest in needs to have a business case. And when we're asking them to invest in something where the business case isn't clear, or the technology is new, or something like that, it's I think of interest to everyone to buy down that risk by offering a lower interest rate and channeling it through our partners. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lorna. I want to also add my 2 cents on the private sector investments. I'm sure the audience knows that there are 2 windows, in IFAD's private sector investment area. There is the ABC fund, which actually goes out, head hunting for opportunities to invest in, and they have a due diligence protocol that they follow. They actually get to negotiating interest rates below market rate and the rates are not concessional. The example in Ghana where they came up with something like 19% on a loan that was being asked by one of the agribusiness investors compared to 25, 30%. So they're quite competitive when it comes to the ABC funds that are going around. The non-sovereign operations window here in Ivory Coast where I'm sitting, EcoKim, which is a cooperative that buys and exports cocoa. They've taken, loans from the ABC fund now. I think they're going in for the third one. If not, they've completed the second loan. And again, they find their ABC fund loans interesting and they go for it because they are more affordable than the market and they actually cover IFAD's, target market. On the NSO, we also have an interesting experience in Nigeria with Babangona. And they've taken, the NSO operation funds and they're doing fine with them. And these funds are not given at concessional rates, but given at negotiated rates. The word that we are trying to sell now is negotiation. Why? Because the market does not really exist in this area where IFAD is working. Talking about distortion, Serge, I'm glad that you asked that question, but you know very well that this is a market segment that only IFAD and a few IFAs go there. So there is even no competition where you will be thinking about, who is distorting whose effort out there. There's just very little, and then compared to the magnitude, as colleagues have said, it's very little money that is going into that sector. Talking about distortion, when you introduce the word distortion and you go around and say, okay, if IFAD withdraws, who else goes there? You will not see anybody going. So there is actually a lot more of development finance, like Mark said, that we are doing rather than commercial finance where one would be thinking about distortionary effects. I think we are still good on time. We now have to go to the third question. Let me just check with Anais. Is there any question we are missing?
Yes, there's some other questions, but seeing the time, I guess maybe it's better to move on with the third question.
Could you just read them, because in our efforts to answer the next set of questions, we can be coming in with elements of responses.
Of course. Okay, so Edgar asked, do you know if financial institutions have reduced their interest rate when farmers were insured against climatic risks, as the risk has been reduced for these clients? Any example of insurance program has adjusted the cost model for interest rates? Then Andrews asked two questions. Commercial banks are faced with high cost of originating smaller agri loans. Aside the risk, does IFAD have any intervention that defrays the cost of origination? And he also asked, what are IFAD's programs, initiatives to improve the regulatory environment to encourage lending to agri SMEs? Then Patrick asked, given the sort of hyperinflation experienced in the sub-Saharan Africa, how plausible is it for Apex Bank Ghana to cover its cost of operations with a single-digit interest rate as a wholesale FI? And the last one from Samuel, in a country like Sierra Leone, where the local currency continues to depreciate rapidly and deter lenders from lending at below the market rate, which risk mechanism is put in place to reduce eroding the value of the working capital? And a last one from Thuhi, what is usually the exit situation of your projects? The offered interest rates goes up. That's all the questions.
Thank you very much. We are not going to be dishonest to say that we'll answer the questions. We've taken note of them, and we will, in the course of providing clarifications to the last question, we will come up with some of this. But just so that I take the advantage that I have the microphone, a typical example of where our climate mitigation interventions have actually led to the reduction of interest rates is in Mali. Please look at a project called Inclusive, and you will see the introduction of, de-risking activities along a typical value chain and how that has influenced the interest rate. By clearly identifying and confirming the de-risking activities, the risk premium in the calculation of the interest rate was dropped. So that is a typical example. The question on whether Apex Bank covers its cost of operations, yes. Apex Bank looked at the formula, looked at the advantages of the concessional resources coming from GCF. That is another example where, climate finance actually contributed to dropping the interest rate. That is an example in Ghana. But we sat down with Apex Bank and their senior economists, and they went through the calculation of that single-digit interest rate and agreed that they could actually cover their cost of operations by taking in that volume of money for a 21-year period. Mark highlighted, if giving a loanable resource to a financial institution for 21 years is not an incentive, it's not a subsidy. What is that? I don't even understand. But yes, thank you for many questions that I've asked. We cannot answer all of them because of time. We'll now go to the last question, and then if we have more time, we can come back to try to answer these questions. But colleagues, these questions that Anais has asked, if you are answering these questions, try to integrate some elements of response. So we're going now to the third and last question, and it will be answered in this order. Lorna, you will go first, followed by Sauli, and then Mark, last but not the least. And the question is this, and this is under the indirect but associated non-financing. How does IFAD subsidize the other indirect financing opportunities like financial literacy, digital financial services, business development services, value chain development, and 4Ps? This question is asked within the sphere where you cannot do loans alone without these other activities because they are complementing. I take this opportunity to share with the audience that FAO conducted a research on what are the priority areas for any smallholder farmer to be profitable. And it was discovered that access to loans out of 6 items was the 4th on the list. The first was access to viable markets. And so we have taken on board an IFAD to do the associated non-financing tools that accompany the financing tools. So Lorna, over to you. How would you subsidize, these other areas where it's not loans, it's not, equity, it's not risk, management tools?
Okay. Great, thanks for that. I actually thought I was doing the matching grants question, but let me just say, first I want to plug the fact that we're going to be having a matching grants sort of decision paper publication at some point very soon, so we can have another webinar on the matching grant side. On the non-financial thing, right off the top of my head, the way I approach this in general is I think of the farmer as somebody, man or woman, that's got these hurdles, and he's running in a race, or she's running in a race, and she has to go over these hurdles. And the hurdles are, on one side there's like the financing, and on the other side is the this runner or hurdler. And the runner, all these things that you mentioned, the non-financial stuff, whether it's financial literacy, whether it's value chain strengthening, whether it's technical assistance for production, business, whatever, these are all things to improve the strength of the runner here so that they can get over these hurdles. And on the other side is these financial institutions that we want them to lower the hurdles. So this is kind of how I approach it. And underlying every design that I've been in before IFAD and even during IFAD is making farmers or agribusinesses better business people, better farmers, better business people, so that they can be able to find access to finance. So all the stuff that we do with them is critically important, and it's all often very often like full of subsidy. Of course, we don't have that many sort of user pay types of systems. And we often use the farmer groups to develop a lot of these services for the farmers, because it's a cost saving measure. So I'll just leave it at that and let my colleagues answer this as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Sauli, and I want to assure our audience that we have experts in IFAD, and these were not questions that were delivered to them to prepare. You can hear Lorna saying she was preparing for another question and we asked this one. Thank you so much, Lorna. Sauli, over to you, and then Mark.
Yeah, so thanks, interesting. So non-financial support. So we always have a technical assistance facility. Almost all projects that include credit lines or credit guarantees have a TA facility on the side, which usually involves technical assistance to financial institutions that are involved, technical assistance to sometimes to the public sector for the enabling environment, technical assistance to recipient clients, including business development services for companies, and also technical assistance services to the farmers. In most cases, that would be in the form of financial literacy and then simple business planning type of support. So I think this is the usual scenario, and then you can add on, like if you want to do a certain type of value chain, you can add technical assistance to a certain value chain or green finance or whatever you need to enable the type of instrument that we are rolling out. So I guess that would be the usual set. There's a question also that was mentioned or that was in the chat, which was on, do we ever assist on the origination cost for the pipeline? For the commercial bank? Usually no. I haven't seen many IFAD projects, actually not one, where we actually subsidize the origination cost, but maybe there are some projects that I'm not aware of. But what we do is we offer technical assistance budget to the farmers, and technical assistance budget to the financial institutions on both sides of the equation. So we offer help for developing the business plans, and we offer help for assessment and evaluation of those. So in a way, we are subsidizing it through the TA facilities, through these non-financial instruments, but not directly like a subsidy element saying that you have origination cost, we cover 50% of it. This we don't usually have. There are other projects though. There's something called Aceli Africa, which is maybe an interesting example of such type of you can Google it, that have that type of instrument. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, thanks. Again, I agree with my colleagues, and just compliment them a little bit. Is the way, especially with BRAM investments these days, which are higher costs, we have to put together an enticing package with lots of different instruments, and many of them are non-financial. And they can go both to the smallholders, or they can go to the agri-enterprises within value chains. And just as a side note, we're focusing a lot more on financing them within our sovereign operations, specifically than we used to, which is a good thing. How a lead farmer, how our lead enterprise can get technical assistance, as Sauli was saying, and that benefits the upstream to the producers with better quality inputs, better quality technical assistance, contracts, et cetera, from lead farmer or lead enterprise. So that's another form of, trying to subsidize them into a better market arrangement. So technical assistance. But we also mentioned earlier financial literacy, but I would add to that financial awareness. There's a difference between understanding how a balance sheet works and understanding the value of leveraging your balance sheet, right? So a lot of people go, oh, well, I don't want a loan because I'm so afraid to get a loan. But if you can show the economics work to them, and through simple, economics exercises or business development, they'll say, they take a loan, they go, wow, this is great. I've earned so much more, even though I've taken on debt. And sometimes that's a lesson people have to learn in practice. And if we walk through them and graduate them, there's graduation programs. You can start with the very, very, very poor, and then move them and graduate them along, and that should be subsidized less and less as they go up the chain from highly subsidized to market rate. And then there were some things that Lorna mentioned that I really like as well. Helping indirectly helping our producers through, say, for example, national associations, farmer organizations, and they can do a lot of good things in terms of getting information out or aggregating demand, so it lowers the cost of origination for financial service providers, or getting them contracts, et cetera, et cetera. One last thing I'll just mention, and I know it's somewhat controversial, but not, is challenge funds. Challenge funds, they challenge financial institutions to come up with ideas on their own, right? Is there some area of demand that they'd like to see served in our market areas for our beneficiaries? And what is their idea? I just saw 4 great ideas come out of a challenge fund in Kyrgyzstan. One was a market platform to help get better prices, and that was a financial institution doing that. Agent banking into rural areas to help extend their reach. And there's a couple of other ones. Really great ideas, and they're demand driven without us having to do the demand analysis up front, which I really like. I know there's some drawbacks to the challenge fund model, but it's something that can subsidize things from the idea right through to piloting and to commercialization. So I'll leave it at that. There's lots of great stuff. Over.
Thank you very much, Mark. We are running out of time, and so we want to check with the audience if they have some questions, related to this last item about, associated non-financial services, whether, how subsidies come around them. If not, we can then go to the last but one item. Let me just assure the audience that we are closing in the next 5 minutes. Any questions? Are there any questions? Any hands up?
I did not see any question, but maybe, Mark, it would be a great moment to launch the poll. Maybe 1 minute, so that I will it's just 2 questions that should appear right now on your screen. So please, audience, if you can, people from the audience, just answer. The first one is the inclusive rural finance policy? Choose one option, either a compliance document or a guide for good practice inclusive finance. And the second question is, what is the best way to communicate out the inclusive rural finance policy? Either the community of practice events, the newsletters, the IRF PowerPoint presentations, or other, and you can please indicate in the chat box. I see that people are already starting to answer. I won't leave it too long since we're running out of time, but a few more seconds. Okay. We've reached half of the participants, so I will just end the poll now and we will see the results. Can you all see the results?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So to the first question, is the inclusive rural finance policy, what is it? Either a compliance document or a guide for good practice inclusive finance. So 88% responded the second one. And regarding the second question, what is the best way to communicate out the inclusive rural finance policy? Most of the people said to do it on the community of practice events and also through newsletters. Great, thank you. I think with that, we can go to the concluding remarks.
Okay, before we go to the concluding remarks, the question that Lorna had mentioned, which is IFAD grants and matching grant subsidies. Of course, all of us can, safely answer it as yes. If we had time, we would have discussed the pros and the cons of using grants and matching grants as subsidies. But again, yes, grants are subsidies, especially when they come through the financing systems and targeted to reduce this cost or the other one. Thank you very much for listening. I now hand over the microphone to Mark to close this session.
Well, I wasn't prepared to close the session, Jonathan. I just want to thank you so much for organizing this and being as provocative as you always are. And we look forward to other events coming up to support the implementation of the inclusive rural finance policy and support everybody's questions and thoughts and ideas. As Lorna mentioned, there's going to be a matching grant publication. We have a line of credit publication in the works, and we also have a growing number of tools that we hope to put up on a public platform within the network as well. So look for some of those things. And we have also you can get on the network a FAQ document which answers some of these questions, maybe not to the details that we have. But again, thanks, Solly, Lorna, Jonathan, Anais, and everybody, and all of you for showing up. Do we have a survey at the another survey at the end? So we're doing a quality survey at the end. Please fill it out, and we look forward to you joining us in our next workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.